Well, hi everyone. I'm Don Hyder. I have the privilege of being the executive director of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. Tonight marks one of our proudest nights of the year. This is the night when our fantastic Hackworth Fellows, who we have had the privilege of working with all year, give a little bit of the results of what they've done and how they've done it. And so thank you for joining us. And we're excited for this evening, excited to hear from our Hackworth students. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, David DeCosse.
Thank you so much, Don, and welcome to everyone on the showcase. Of course, students here, and of course, their families and friends. It's really wonderful to have you be part of this annual event, which we enjoy so much. The Markkula Center for Applied Ethics offers an array of hands-on learning opportunities for students. We certainly prize the study of ethical theory, but we are especially focused on offering opportunities for students to study, think, act with regard to ethics in real life. And that will be manifest tonight across the different program areas we're going to be hearing from: Hackworth Fellowships, Business Ethics Internship, Environmental Ethics Fellowship, and Government Ethics Fellowship. So let's get right to the chase here, as they say. If you have questions as we go, please put them in the question box on Zoom. Also, we have posted in the question box a link to something we call the Markkula Center's Framework for Ethical Decision Making. Our students tonight may refer to that framework, which is something developed over the last 35 plus years at the Ethics Center that's meant to be an excellent shorthand to help people think through challenging ethical decisions. All right, our first students up are those representatives of our what we call our campus ethics team as part of the Hackworth Fellowships. The Hackworth Fellowships were established about 20 plus years ago through a very generous gift from Mike and Joan Hackworth. We are forever grateful to them and to their family for really now the generations of students whom they've supported. Our campus ethics team includes Hydeia Wysinger, a senior psychology and public health major from El Sobrante, California; Claire Krebs, a junior majoring in neuroscience and philosophy from Portland, Oregon; Anna Mulderink, a junior majoring in mechanical engineering from Chicago, Illinois; Caroline Smith, a senior double majoring in communication and philosophy from Seattle, Washington; and Noah Kisiel, a junior majoring in philosophy and political science from Massachusetts. I will turn it over to the campus ethics team, please.
Hi, we are the campus ethics team, part of the Hackworth Fellowship. Over the past school year, we met bi-weekly with our advisor, Don Hyder, to explore and address ethical challenges facing our campus community. Each of us brought unique perspectives and concerns to the table, which sparked thoughtful conversations on a wide range of issues, from SU's medical amnesty policy to how we can foster a more connected and inclusive student body. As the year progressed, a common theme emerged in many of our conversations: the importance of building stronger connections across campus through an ethical lens. This theme shaped several of our projects. We applied ethical frameworks like justice, care, and the common good to the real issues students face. Today, we're excited to share some of the work we've done, the ideas that have inspired us, and how we brought ethical thinking into action on campus.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Smith. I'm a senior at Santa Clara, and I'm a double major in philosophy and communication. And for my Hackworth Fellowship project, I created a video series on ethical decision-making, what it looks like, how different frameworks can guide us, and how we can think more intentionally about the choices we make. And I chose this project because, looking back on the last 4 years at Santa Clara, I feel really lucky that I've had the opportunity to study philosophy. It's given me the tools to think through tough decisions more clearly, But even with those tools, it can still be really hard sometimes. And that's something that I've kind of realized through my process at college is that this is a time that's supposed to prepare us for the real world, where we're constantly going to have to be navigating complex situations. But with that being said, still not everyone has the chance to develop those tools or take a class in philosophy. And that's really why I wanted to create something that is accessible. I wanted these videos to be a starting point where anyone who's ever found themselves asking what's the right thing to do in this situation can really find a resource. The Markkula Center has so many amazing resources like these frameworks that we focused on for this project. And I really wanted these videos to bridge the gap between the Markkula Center and the students at Santa Clara in general. As well as help people feel more comfortable exploring and kind of know where they can start. At the end of the day, this video series wasn't about, suggesting a right way to answer questions or promote one specific framework as a way for evaluating decisions or thinking in general. It was really just about sharing something that's helped me in my life and hopefully making it easier for others to explore these frameworks. If you would like to check the videos out, please feel free to scan the QR code that's on the slideshow. And stay tuned for the rest of the videos to be posted on the Markkula Center's Instagram. Lastly, I'd just like to thank my fellow Hackworth Fellows who participated in these videos and made it possible for them to happen. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hydeia Wysinger. I am a senior here at Santa Clara University, psychology and public health double major, and I'm really excited to share a bit about the project that I've been embarking on this school year with the Hackworth Fellows, specifically the campus ethics team. So my project explores the experiences of Black students in today's evolving socio-political climate, especially in the light of changing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts within higher education. As institutions face increased scrutiny and shifting public narratives around DEI, it felt important to ask the question, how do universities stay true to their stated values of inclusion, equity, and community care? To answer this, I framed the project through what's called a care and justice lens, an ethical framework that asks us to consider not only fairness in rights, but also relationships, emotional integrity, and responsibility to others. One of the central goals of my project was really to uplift student narratives and to ensure that the voices and lived experiences of Black students aren't just acknowledged, but that they would be truly centered in conversations around institutional change. So this project really wanted to explore what sustainable pathways for advocacy and structural transformation might look like within classrooms, student life, and beyond. So you'll see on the right two events that have been a part of this broader effort. One was uplifting Black voices and collaborating with the Black Student Union on campus, Igwe, and celebrating Black Joy, which was a collaborative event during Black History Month. Both events which were designed to build community and affirm identity while also pushing back against institutional silence. Key findings of my project included students really wanting Black Joy to be celebrated and highlighted and not just the traumatic experiences, but really talking about what forms community and sense of belonging here on campus. So I'm super excited that I'll be sharing more of this work soon through various blog posts and a podcast on the Markkula Center website. So stay tuned for that if you're interested in learning more about the findings and reflections from this project. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Claire Krebs. I am a junior here at Santa Clara studying neuroscience and philosophy. And another thing we did was incorporate the care and common good lenses in reforming SU's medical amnesty policy. So imagine you're at a dorm party and you notice that your friend has had too much to drink. You know that calling campus safety is an option, but you also know that your friend has already used their amnesty freshman year and will face full punitive sanctions if you call for help. So you're confused and you don't know how to get your friend the help that they need without also getting them in trouble. This is not a hypothetical ethical dilemma. This was a reality for Santa Clara students under our previous medical amnesty policy. The policy is supposed to protect students from facing disciplinary or legal consequences for violating drug or alcohol policies when they seek medical assistance for themselves or others, or when assistance is sought for them. It is meant to encourage students to ask for help when needed. However, the old policy was limited only to alcohol consumption, not to any other drugs, which included date rape drugs, and it could only be invoked once. So if a student called for help once, then they wouldn't be able to call again without facing consequences. These stipulations made calling for help more confusing and created situations where students weren't sure whether or not they or their friends would be granted protection if they did call for help. So we saw that this was a flaw, and we decided to meet with Dean of Students Matthew Duncan, who compiled a working group with representatives from the Markkula Center, the Office of Student Life, the Wellness Center, our Associated Student Government, and SEU EMS. We thought that it was important to make the policy more all-encompassing and reduce limits on its use. We met regularly throughout the fall and winter to develop a new policy with these goals in mind. It was approved by the Student Affairs UPC in the beginning of this month, and we are very glad to have a new policy that incorporates these themes of care and the common good, and thereby focuses on the needs of students and to improve their relationship with the university.
Hi, I'm Noah, and as our final project of the year, we wanted to engage with some inward-facing ethical issues. Ethics often discusses how we should treat each other, but it also necessarily involves how we treated ourselves. To address this, we created another video series, this time focused on answers to the question, what does it mean to truly know yourself? In order to account for the abstractness and discovery required for this topic, we pulled from a variety of wisdom traditions that expose viewers to a range of cultures, philosophies, geographies, and time periods. This involved existentialist ideas like existence precedes essence, meaning you aren't born with a predetermined identity, purpose, or expectation. You come into this world first, and only through your actions, choices, and commitments do you define who you are. And this also ranged to Taoist sentiments like knowing yourself is about becoming indefinable. It's about shedding the rigid stories you've been told by embracing the flow of transformation within reality by transforming with it. We also drew from traditions of Ikigai, Stoicism, Ubuntu, and Ignatian spirituality. Although each video and wisdom tradition answered this question in their own way, they all drew from the same core point that knowing yourself is about integrity, alignment, and living a life that is authentically your own by coming into a deeper awareness of who you are. This can involve things like understanding your core values, your deeper purpose, your fears, dreams, passions, and your sense of belonging in the world. But we also thought it was important to emphasize that in reality, there's no one correct answer to this question. Rather than filming these videos ourselves, we decided to engage with different professors and staff members at this university who work within each tradition. This involved working with members of the Business School, Philosophy Department, and Ignatian Center. These videos are in their final stage of production and should be available on the Markkula website soon. Thank you.
Lastly, all of us on the campus ethics team want to thank everyone again, especially David and Don. Not only did Don guide us throughout the year, but he also made every meeting engaging and memorable. We took our role on the team seriously and actually tried to bring ethics into campus, into everyday life. Our theme, Ethical Lenses and Actions, shaped how we approached our project. Each one was grounded in a specific ethical framework, helping us demonstrate that these theories aren't just abstract ideas. They're meaningful tools for real-life decision-making. It's one thing to learn about ethical lenses in a classroom, but we wanted to take it a step further by showing how these frameworks can be applied and embodied in daily life. Through our work, we didn't just use different ethical lenses. We aimed to help others see how they can do the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much, campus ethics team. And as Anna said there, the campus ethics team worked with Ethics Center Executive Director Don Hyder. Great job, team. All right, our next presenters will be two more Hackworth Fellows. Here, the team is Tara Khambadkone, a junior majoring in computer science from Santa Clara, California, and Sophie Smithstanza, a junior majoring in accounting from Portland, Oregon. And they will get us into the incredibly important topic of AI. Over to you, Tara and Sophie.
Hi, everyone. So in the past few years, AI has had a seismic impact on college campuses everywhere. So we work to understand what's going on with AI at Santa Clara. Artificial intelligence is a technology that enables machines to stimulate human intelligence like learning, problem solving, and decision making. It's about creating systems that can understand, interpret, and respond to the world in a way that mimics human cognitive processes. The effects of AI have noticeably changed the classroom at Santa Clara and at universities everywhere. We work to solve how Santa Clara, as an academic institution, is responding to AI. We didn't want to encourage AI or demonize it, but rather understand what's going on so we can work to solve the problem or find solutions to improve learning at Santa Clara. The Jesuit education emphasizes being lifelong learners. One aspect of that involves being critical thinkers. This was most important to me in my research and something that really guided a lot of my thinking and how we asked questions in our survey, which I'll discuss in a few moments. Santa Clara students often graduate prepared for their lives and future careers and are become well-rounded individuals. We wanted to make sure that students learned how to use AI, what it does, and the impacts it has on the environment and the world around us. We also looked at professor-student relationships and academic integrity concerns. With AI, professors are less trusting of their students given the amount of students who regularly use AI to submit work. Additionally, many AI trackers to check work aren't accurate, so it's challenging to gauge what work a student made and what is not. Additionally, AI creates grade inflation and brings up the lowest performers, skewing the typical grade distribution in the classroom. With all this being said, in the fall we worked on learning about AI, how other schools are responding, how it works, different language models. In the winter, we began developing and planning our survey, and this past quarter, we released our survey to both professors and students. One of our questions we asked was, could AI replace traditional schooling? From our student survey, 52% of students said yes, with only 48% saying no. This emphasizes the varying viewpoints and opinions about AI and just how many opinions there are. In our research, most of our questions did not have a clear opinion or answer. Most of our questions had a pretty even distribution. And with that being said, I'll let Tara explain the rest of our results.
Another significant finding between the survey results so far is that faculty seems to have more uncertainty about how many undergrad students at SCU are using AI compared to the students themselves. Additionally, faculty members tend to make higher estimates of student AI usage than the students themselves. However, the qualitative questions of the survey truly demonstrate how both students and faculty feel about AI in the classroom. One student response reads, "AI has really robbed my peers of learning course materials actively, and it is incredibly sad to see." A faculty member wrote, "I pulled the trigger for phased retirement at least 3 years earlier than I intended." Powerfully, some responses from both surveys convey sentiments of lost opportunities, whereas others acknowledge new opportunities that AI might grant us. Moreover, many responses from both surveys express long-term concerns over the current climate of AI usage in the classroom. If anything, these quotes indicate that at least university-level change is necessary to productively preserve critical thinking and human flourishing as AI technology rapidly advances. We hope that these survey responses can better inform students.
No, she's towards the end.
We hope that these survey responses can better inform students and faculty about how one another is dealing with the effects of growing artificial intelligence use in the educational space. We also hope that the university can take a serious look at the results of our work through this fellowship, as well as the work of future Hackworth Fellows and other peers studying AI ethics in education, to productively address student and faculty concerns. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tara and Sophie, for getting us more rooted in this incredibly important issue, to say the least, that cuts to the very heart of the moral purpose of education. Our next speaker will be a little step out of a Hackworth Fellowship for the moment. We will feature Chisomaga Nlemigbo. And Chisomaga is our business ethics intern this year. He is a senior double majoring in political science and public health from Hayward, California. Chisomaga, over to you.
Thank you. So for the past year, I've been interning in the Ethics and Legal Compliance Department at Intel, which is headquartered here in Santa Clara. And this has been a really fruitful internship experience, as as it's exposed me to a variety of ideas, concepts, and situations that typically arise within the corporate legal landscape. And as an overview of some of the main things that I did, I primarily manage Ask Ethics, which is Intel's internal employee question submission database where employees can submit ethical and legal concerns and ask for guidance on how to appropriately navigate these situations. And as part of this process, I worked with Intel's in-house attorneys and various subject matter experts on advising these employees on how to act within these situations and giving them appropriately tailored guidance and next steps. And these concerns covered a wide variety of topics such as conflict of interest and the exchange of GMET between Intel employees and external third parties such as vendors, suppliers, and government representatives, as well as the protection of assets like intellectual property and the actual physical products and services that Intel creates, as well as AI usage within the workplace. Additionally, I also generated monthly and quarterly reports. The monthly reports tracked metrics for employee trainings that needed to be completed before the end of the year, such as code of conduct and information security and privacy awareness. And the quarterly reports focus specifically on the different types of Ask Ethics submissions that we receive from the different regions and facilities that Intel operates. And this ties into the last part of what I was doing throughout my internship, which involves research and data extraction. So typically my supervisors would ask me to extract specific data from particular regions or different points in time to help with making more informed business decisions or trying to promote a more positive and powerful culture of ethical decision making within the workplace. And overall, this internship experience, like I said previously, was very fruitful and valuable for me and really helped a lot with career discernment as I'm preparing to graduate from SCU. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chisomaga. Now we're going to go back to more of our wonderful Hackworth Fellows. Our first speaker in our next round here will be Yasmin Urzua-Gutierrez. Yasmin is a senior double major in political science and economics who came to us all the way from Nebraska. Yasmin, over to you, please.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Yasmin Urzua-Gutierrez, and my project this year has centered around the question that is, what rights do we owe undocumented migrants in the United States, especially as we look through it in the ethical lenses of rights and justice. My research has explored the ethical failures of U.S. immigration policy, particularly how it systematically neglects the dignity and rights of undocumented migrants. Undocumented migrants within the U.S. in most states are not allowed to get a driver's license, which limits their mobility. They cannot apply for government benefits such as Medicaid or SNAP, making them vulnerable to health problems. And they're often exploited in the workplace because employment contracts cannot legally be upheld, leading to a lot of cases where employers simply refuse to pay after a job has been completed. I grounded my research in the idea of policy dilemmas, which are difficult decisions between competing moral goals. As author of the book argues, these dilemmas differ from normal political barriers. Rather, they require confronting values that result in ethical trade-offs. And in the case of migration policy, this looks like border security versus human dignity. But what's often missing in those policy debates is the voice of the people that are most affected, especially as migrants live in fear of deportation if they were to speak their mind. So in addition to analyzing policy dilemmas, I spent this year interviewing migrants from various legal statuses, undocumented, legal residents, and naturalized citizens to understand and tell their lived experiences. I pulled a few quotes from those interviews to share with you today. One undocumented participant told me, "For me, I've never had the security to even do normal things like drive my kids to school. Even though it is a necessity, I cannot do it safely or even freely." A legal resident said, "If I could tell policymakers anything, it would be to look at me as a human who deserves protection too." And a naturalized citizen reflected on their border crossing by saying, "I remember perfectly the picture of the Virgin Mary on the truck that took me over the border, with the words, 'Sea prudente con el tiempo, los tuyos te esperan.' I just prayed to God that he would give me a good life in the US because I knew I was going to stay for a long time." These voices really underscore a moral truth, which is that policy should not just manage people, it should respect their humanity. In closing, I would just like to leave you all with a quote from a theologian who is a very influential voice in my research. Michael D. Jackson says, How much does one have to sacrifice to have a life worth living? As much as one yearns for pastures new, one also yearns in an alien land to be at home again, or at least to recover a balance between being an actor and being acted upon, a balance I refer to elsewhere as being at home in the world. As I prepare to graduate and enter the world of policymaking, may I and my future colleagues never forget that at the heart of every debate is a human who deserves dignity and fairness, and policy must reflect that. Thank you, viva la raza, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. Our next speaker will be another Hackworth Fellow, Edward Sorensen. Edward is a senior double major in finance and philosophy from Rockville, Maryland. Edward.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, Dr. DeCosse. Conventionally, ethics and finance often aren't connected, but I think they should be. Every decision we make, whether consciously or unconsciously, factors in our ethical values, even those in the business world. The primary motivation for my Hackworth project was to make this connection more clear. I wanted to create a more approachable resource that highlights the relevance of ethical behavior in the finance industry, geared towards finance students and young finance professionals like myself. Ever since coming to Santa Clara, ethics has always been emphasized in the business courses I've taken. But it's also always kind of felt like an external filter applied to ensure that courses of action meet minimum legal standards or the minimum thresholds for socially acceptable behavior. I found over the course of my fellowship, however, that ethics and finance have a much more fundamental relationship. My project entailed interviewing 4 professionals from across the finance industry: a professor of behavioral finance at Santa Clara, an assistant treasurer at a fintech, a director at a venture debt firm, and a managing director at a large asset management firm, representing the corporate, venture capital, and banking sectors while tying in the psychological elements informing decision-making across the field. I supplemented this with research into bias and heuristics to contextualize my empirical findings, and I'm currently writing an article synthesizing these ideas. My research led to 4 primary takeaways, which you can see on the right side of the screen. First, that culture comes from the top. This was something echoed by nearly everyone I spoke to. Essentially, organizational culture tracks the standards, policies, practices, and role modeling of those who lead organizations. Second, we, humans, make biased decisions. This is simply by virtue of how our brains work. Whether we're consciously aware or not, we're subject to a wide variety of cognitive biases that lead us to make the decisions we make. One key effect of this is framing, the phenomenon in which the decisions we make tend to be directly shaped by the manner in which information is presented to us. Third, ethical behavior comes from organizational culture. So culture comes from the top, and the way individuals behave in an organization follows from the culture. The ethical standard set across the company is generally the standard employees will index their decision-making around, regardless of other external ethical influences, and this is also another effective framing. Lastly, incentives should track desired outcomes. Generally, in pretty much every financial scandal or crisis, from Enron to Sunbeam to the subprime mortgage market failures before the 2008 financial crisis, the issue comes from firms prioritizing stock price or Wall Street projections, or the number of mortgages sold, or other incentives over transparency, legality, sustainable long-run competitive strategies, and the implicit social role each business has by virtue of the externalities they create that aren't reflected in their market prices. Speaking broadly, ethics and finance are incredibly interrelated, not only due to moral obligations, but because good businesses also tend to act ethically. Thus, ethics and finance deserve to be viewed not as dissonant, but as complements towards the ultimate goal of generating collective value. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edward. And I wanted to note, Edward worked with Ann Skeet, our Director of Leadership and Business Ethics, and my apologies to my colleagues for not noting also, Tara and Sophie worked with Brian Green, our Director of Technology Ethics, and Yasmin worked with Don Hyder, our Executive Director. Our next speaker will be another Hackworth Fellow, Zara Shroff. Zara worked with Sabu Vincent, our Director of Journalism and Media Ethics, and Zara is a senior communication major from London, England. Zara, over to you.
Good evening, my fellow Hackworth Fellows, and good evening to my distinguished mentors as well. I have a quick question for you. How many of you have actually updated your iPhone lately? But for the sake of time, please don't bother to actually answer that. With the latest rollout of Apple Intelligence, the Photos app now includes a tool called Cleanup. You can literally circle a stranger in the background of your photo, and poof, they disappear. No Photoshop, no editing skills, just one tap. At first I thought, Okay, that's convenient. But then it hit me. That is a creative choice my phone just made for me, quietly and automatically. That moment was my wake-up call, not just about tech, but about what it means to be a creative person right now. I've always wanted to work in the creative world, fashion, media, and design, but lately all I hear is AI is going to replace you. So over the past few months, under the mentorship of Dr. Subbu Vincent, I've been working on a project that sits at the intersection of ethics, AI, and creative work. I set out to explore how creatives, from students like us and professionals in media and art, are grappling with AI's rapid rise. I interviewed people across the spectrum. Andrew Main, a former OpenAI programmer, who claims that in the AI economy, there will be 0% unemployment. That optimism stood in the stark contrast to Dr. Kathy Aoki, our very own SU art professor, who voiced genuine concerns about creativity being stifled and diluted. I asked real-world questions students like us care about, like, do you use AI in your creative work? And if so, how much? And where do you draw the line? Figma AI tools came up a lot, but the one common denominator was that everyone's still figuring it out. Even the data reflects this uncertainty. In 2023, Dr. Brian Greene at the Markkula Center surveyed 3,000 Americans. 45% were excited about AI's future, 35% were concerned, and the rest, unsure. So if even the experts are conflicted, where does that leave us? That question led me to the work of another SCU student, Rafael Guerrero, who used the Center's 6 ethical lenses to build a framework for engineering projects. His idea, start with values and design from there. That clicked for me. So I built a creative version of that framework for people trying to make good work without losing their creative compass. For instance, under the justice lens, would my work be judged differently if I didn't disclose AI was involved? Under the virtue lens, is this aligned with the kind of creative I want to become? Be it an artist, a musician, a media person, a designer? All of this is culminated in my guidebook, Before You Prompt, on the right, which will be published in June. It's a student-facing toolkit that helps creators reflect ethically before they collaborate with AI. Because in the end, the future of creativity isn't just about what AI can do, it's about what we choose to do with it and the values that we bring to every prompt, project, or post. Thank you so much. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Zara, for getting us more deeply into AI and its link to creativity, such an important topic, to say the least. Our next speaker will be another Hackworth Fellow, Jamie Son. Jamie worked this year with Dorothy Caminiti, our Director of Bioethics, and Jamie is a public health science major from Atlanta, Georgia. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I first want to start off this presentation. I want you to imagine thinking you're living with a chronic illness while being uninsured. Whether it's diabetes or hypertension, your illness is something that requires constant medical attention. Now imagine your next medical appointment is coming up, but you skip it, not because you're uninsured or you don't care about your health, but showing up might put you at risk of deportation. At Community Health, a free clinic in Chicago, this scenario is a devastating reality for undocumented immigrants. As earlier this year, sanctuary spaces like hospitals and clinics are constantly monitored by United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE. And because of this, Community Health has reported that almost 30% of their patients either skipped or canceled their appointment due to fear of deportation. And this fear is not unwarranted, as even immigrants with legal status have been wrongfully deported or detained in the current administration. For my research project, I focus on the bioethics of immigration detention centers because many are aware of what happens in the detention centers. Current literature shows that there is very limited information on the health conditions of detainees. However, previous accounts of survivors from detention centers state that they face abuse and severe medical neglect from ICE officials. In fact, detainees have stated that once they enter these facilities, that their medications are confiscated, that they're denied medical treatment, and that their health outcomes become worse because, as we can see in the images on the right, these facilities are often overcrowded, unsanitary, and poorly resourced. And furthermore, some healthcare professionals working in these facilities have stated that they have resigned because they were prevented from providing medically necessary treatment. And the conditions of these detention centers and the treatment of detainees clearly violate the principles of bioethics, bringing more harm as they continue inhumane practices. The right to healthcare should be a human right for everyone. In fact, the United States Constitution provides the right to due process, equal protection, and freedom of speech for every individual, regardless of one's immigration status. However, these rights are routinely denied in immigration detention, as previous detainees state that they are not given access to contact immigration lawyers, or that they're placed in prolonged solitary confinement for speaking up about their medical neglect or abuse. Ultimately, immigration detention centers need urgent reform or should be defunded, as this current system prioritizes control and punishment. Immigration status should never be a barrier to medical treatment, and detainees should not be subjected to suffering due to denied care. As global citizens, we need to demand transparency, access to reliable data, and accountability from immigration detention centers to provide healthcare and a public health approach that centers around humanity and not punishment. Thank you.
Jamie, thank you so much for touching again on such a contemporary and vital issue. Our next speaker will be another Hackworth Fellow, Gabrielle Pitre, and I have worked with Gabrielle this year, and Gabrielle is a junior from Seattle, Washington, and double major in political science and ethnic studies. And she is going to take us to Louisiana and other places in her presentation. Gabrielle.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Dr. DeCosse, for that introduction. My project is on the importance of faith in Christian Black communities and faith in God in the midst of discrimination as a source of strength. And so what started this project was just my own curiosity on how do I reconcile my faith identity with my racial identity as a young Black woman who's also Catholic. And also looking at the world around me and feeling a lot of frustration and confusion at the state of the political state of our society today, I realized that I'm not the only person who has had these questions or felt these frustrations, and that there are very real examples within my own family of people who have lived through worse racial tensions and maintained their faith in God. And also part of my inspiration for this project was drawing from Black culture, looking to ancestors for strength and guidance, and doing this by examining how Catholic faith has been passed down through generation to generation in my family, and looking at these baptismal records that you see on my slide as evidence of this faith being passed down. And so for a little bit more context, my family is from Opelousas, Louisiana, which is a very small town in St. Landry Parish. And in my research on Opelousas, I came across an event that I don't think is very well known. And it happened in 1868 when the 15th Amendment was being ratified and allowing Black men the right to vote. And during this time, Louisiana was also changing their state constitution to grant this right. And this led to a lot of racial panic among white Americans on Opelousas. And that racial panic resulted in a massacre that lasted 2 weeks and killed 200 Black Americans. And my great-grandfather, Victor N. Lamel, would have been around the age of 18 and most likely in the area of Opelousas during this time. And when I made this discovery, it made me wonder, what does this do to your sense of self as a young Black man who is also Catholic? And what does this do to your faith and your understanding of who you are in this place and time? And despite these atrocities that he witnessed, he kept his faith in God. And even though I wasn't able to find his baptismal records, I found records for his father and his daughter, who was my great-grandmother, Eugenia Lamel. And this demonstrates how this legacy of faith in the face of discrimination and racial terror was maintained. And I also feel that this topic around Black Catholic identity is incredibly relevant, considering we have our first American Pope, and this Pope also has Louisiana Creole roots and is descended from people who not only endured this history of racial violence, but also survived it. And examining what this means for Black Catholics to feel seen in a way that hasn't been recognized before, I think is incredibly powerful. And so that is my project, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Our next speaker will be another Hackworth Fellow, Madison Patrick. And Madison worked this year with our Director of Bioethics, Dorothy Community. Madison is a senior sociology major from Highland, California. Madison, over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Let me begin with a striking contradiction. The United States has one of the most technologically advanced healthcare systems in the world, and yet also has one of the highest maternal mortality rates among developed nations. This disparity points to a deeper ethical issue, that intervention isn't always synonymous with care. In many cases, it's part of a broader systemic failure, where medical interventions are overused, underexplained, and at times entirely unnecessary and harmful to the well-being of the mother and child. Modern obstetric care in the U.S. has become increasingly defined by efficiency, liability avoidance, and institutional protocol, rather than by individualized, informed, and dignified care. Interventions like cesarean sections, inductions, and epidurals have become so routine that we've lost sight of the fact that they're supposed to be tools, not defaults. One of the most ethically urgent concerns here is informed consent. In theory, it's a cornerstone of ethical medicine. Patients should be informed, competent, and free to choose or decline treatment. But in practice, this ideal often collapses in labor and delivery rooms. Laboring women are routinely given interventions without adequate information and sometimes without any explanation at all. There also remains a widespread misconception that accepting the care of a physician at a hospital, and even just the broader act of being in labor, diminishes one's decision-making authority. Contrary to this, evidence suggests that laboring women are entirely capable of retaining their autonomy during childbirth, as targeted tests measuring the relationship between labor pain and comprehension suggested no reduction in decision-making capacity. This misunderstanding is perpetuated by both cultural signaling and clinical environments where defensive medical practices and the associated coercion, even if unintentional, are deeply ingrained. Take, for example, Claudia Lowry, my own grandmother, who while practicing her breathing techniques during labor, was assumed to be hyperventilating and administered a sedative during her childbirth without being consulted. During a later delivery, she was discharged with gauze still inside her body, undocumented and unnoticed by her care team, which could have led to a life-threatening infection. These events were not just clinical oversights. They were ethical violations that undermined her autonomy, dignity, and safety. Driven to protect herself and her children from unwanted interventions, Claudia ultimately resorted to a midwife-assisted home birth for her last two deliveries, the latter of which resulted in the natural birth of healthy 7-pound triplets that she may have otherwise been pressured into an unnecessary C-section for. These stories are more than just anecdotes. They're symptoms of a healthcare culture in which laboring women are not treated as autonomous moral agents, but as passive recipients of care. So what does an ethical response to this look like? The solution lies in shifting from a physician-centered model of unilateral authority to a team-based, ethically grounded approach, where informed consent is comprehensive, decisions are collaborative, and autonomy is protected. This shift can alleviate the fear that drives many defensive practices, distributing liability and empowering patients to participate meaningfully in their own care. We must recognize that childbirth is not a problem to be solved, nor a liability to be managed. It's an intimate human experience that demands the highest standard of ethical care. If we truly value autonomy in medicine, we must honor it, even and especially when the stakes are high. Thank you. Please stay tuned to the Markkula website for the publishing of my full research paper in the coming weeks.
Thank you so much, Madison, for that outstanding presentation on such a tough issue and informed consent. Our next speaker is Hackworth Fellow Grace Davis. Grace is a senior double major in political science and philosophy from Cleveland, Ohio, and I have had the privilege of working this year with Grace. Grace, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. DeCosse, and hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us this evening. The title of my project is The Ethics of Belonging, Honoring the Stories of LGBTQ plus Christians. And storytelling is at the heart of this project. I believe that stories are what binds us and what opens us up to the world around us. And in the news cycles and in the past few decades, you've seen just so much rhetoric around, can there be queer Catholics? Can there be queer Christians? What does it mean to welcome queer people into the church? What does it mean to bring religious institutions into queer places? And in all of these, there's been an absence at the real heart of it. And that's the lived experiences of these people who know that their queerness and their faith are central to who they are. They're inseparable from themselves. And so it was very important to me to bring that into these ethics of belonging conversations. And I was so privileged to have 4 participants come in and have these incredible, vulnerable conversations with me about their lives. And it was important to me for them to also be my contemporaries, other Santa Clara students, because for other reasons that could be a different project, Gen Z is shaping up to be a less religious generation than those before us. And so I also wanted to further narrow this to other young people that are queer and Christian, and how that impacts the way that we're moving through the world. So the heart of this project also resides in human dignity, and that necessitating a full recognition, but really a respect and an appreciation of a member of a moral community, that we don't get to pick and choose what parts of someone that we accept and what parts of someone we decide to care for, that a real care and a real love begins from this full respect of a person. And then finally, these similarities in the missions and in the values of queer communities and Christian communities, that's what inspired my work in the first place. And it's what I see exemplified in these 2 quotes that I'm going to read that come directly from my participants in the similarities they see. So the one in the top right reads, "In the church, my family has been able to get a chosen family. Those Christian spaces were our family." And that's within the queer community too. You kind of find your chosen people, especially when your own family doesn't necessarily support you. It's nice to have that reaffirming space so you don't feel like such an outcast. The second quote reads, "Love is the sole thing that I get when I read the Bible. It's about having a space where you are seen and you are loved more than you can possibly imagine. And that is a love that you can lean on. That is a love that is unconditional." And I think very similarly, that so much of what the queer community is about is love, respecting love and what love looks like and how that looks different for people. This formation of people that love each other because they've gone through a lot of similar experiences. I look forward to sharing these stories with you all in my final project, and thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Grace. We'll now shift. We've got a couple of teams coming up. First, a team of Hackworth Fellows who have focused this year on homelessness and ethics. And this team has 3 members: Natalya Salaices, a senior majoring in Spanish from Hayward, California; Alicia Nelson, a junior psychology major from Denver, Colorado; and JP Best, a senior majoring in philosophy and music from Chicago, Illinois. Over to you, JP, Natalya, and Alicia.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have a lot to cover, so I'm just going to get right into it. We had a very busy year. So to start, we looked at the City of Grants Pass versus Johnson. This was a Supreme Court case that was decided actually just last year in June. So it's been around for about a year. And without boring you, we went into, hundreds of pages of this opinion. So I'll make it quick. The essential ruling asked this question: does a city's enforcement of a law punishing involuntary homelessness violate the Eighth Amendment's protection against cruel and unusual punishment? The court ultimately found that it did not, because anti-camping laws are generally neutrally applicable, meaning they apply to everybody regardless of if they're homeless or not homeless. And the minority opinion dissented and argued that in actuality, the only people being punished by these laws were homeless people, so that it actually wasn't neutrally applicable. This case is incredibly important and has had very big impacts all across the country, even in Fremont, who recently created anti-camping laws. The next thing we looked at was the UCSF study. This is the largest study on homelessness that has been done in America using mixed reporting. So that means that we were looking specifically at interviews with homeless people and also surveys. Over 3,000 people were interviewed during the survey, and it asked a ton of questions: who experiences homelessness, pathways to homelessness, and experiences during homelessness. So if you hear any of us use statistics during our presentations, just know we are pulling from this specific study. It obviously doesn't necessarily encapsulate every single homeless person, but it is a very comprehensive study.
In the beginning of the year, we had the privilege to help out with the Tombstone Project on campus, November 18 and 19 on Canalon. The Tombstone Project honored the lives of the people who have died on the streets of San Jose. This demonstration on campus was to acknowledge the humanity of those who had lost their lives and how many people in our community had passed away while unhoused. Additionally, we had the privilege of working with Alicia Perez, who works at PACT, People Acting in Community Together, about the guaranteed basic income and universal basic income, and about the ethical stances on each topic. We determined GBI could help the homelessness problem since the UCSF homelessness study states 86% of homelessness people reported monthly payments of $300 to $500 would significantly find them housing. Alicia will now explain a bit of the field work we did over the year.
We had the opportunity to volunteer with a group called Agape of Silicon Valley, and we delivered goods to people who were unhoused, such as socks, tarps, and dog food at different locations around San Jose. This also gave us the opportunity to interact directly with people who were unhoused. In a transition to the second part of our presentation today, I will be introducing a timely and local issue. The most recent topic we have been working on as fellows has been analyzing the ethical dimensions of San Jose's Mayor Matt Mahan's new proposal for a law, which we refer to as the three-strike law, defined by San Jose Spotlight as being where homeless people who choose not to accept shelter after 3 attempts within an 18-month period will be subject to arrest for trespassing. The goal is to send people to the behavioral health court system and compel them to get treatment. We have been analyzing and discussing this issue a lot within our small group, and we are all going to offer differing perspectives about the ethical dimensions of this decision, especially when it comes to criminalization. While there are many factors we could have chosen to analyze, focusing on criminalization allows us to engage more deeply with one specific factor rather than focusing on the many factors that surround this issue. For my personal opinion, I believe that by criminalizing people's choice to not accept housing, more people would be getting involved than needed in this process, which would limit the positive impact of instead having direct support for those who are unhoused. According to the utilitarian lens perspective from the Markkula Center's website, the question of how will this action impact everyone affected allows us to question who else would be involved in this process, including whoever would be involved during the initial 3 strikes, who would be involved for an arrest, who would be involved for a hearing before a judge, and who would be included during the resources that come after that. I think that by understanding this concept through this utilitarian lens, more resources should be allotted to people without the interventions of arrest and criminalization in order to help and support people in a more timely manner.
Thank you so much, Alicia. For my opinion, I want to focus specifically on the care ethics lens. The care ethics lens, as opposed to utilitarianism, prioritizes specific individual relationships and knowing specific context to determine how to make a decision. With this framework in mind, I want to ask you how you would react if one of your loved ones was living on the street. According to the UCSF study, unfortunately, homeless people experience a variety of problems from other people and from substance abuse. Approximately 56% of homeless people report using amphetamines more than 3 times a week. 70% report that they are depressed and anxious. And 1,000 of the 3,000 people surveyed at some point in their life attempted to commit suicide. It's really heartbreaking to think about. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are not in a right state of mind who are homeless to make a decision that is in their best interest. And because of this, I think that the 3-strike law gives homeless people an opportunity to be somewhere where they do have shelter and to be somewhere where they are safe, where they are protected, where they can lock themselves in at night, where they have access to use a bathroom, where they have access to a kitchen. And I think that for all of these reasons, since we would want it for the people that we love, we should extend that same care and compassion to strangers who we might not necessarily know. And this is why I am in favor of Matt Mahan's three-strike law.
Thank you, JP. When considering this proposed law, I contemplated why it is easier to use the criminal justice system for homeless people to get the help they need instead of other useful resources to handle the urgency of homelessness needs. In the aspect of the care ethics lens, which refers to the need to listen and respond to individuals and their specific circumstances, I believe the city is responsible for the needs of all its people and take responsibility for the different reasons on why there is a huge homelessness crisis. In this specific law, I believe the needs of the residents that are housed are taken more into consideration than those who are unhoused. The reoccurring safety concerns of homelessness consequences, like starting fires, polluting water, and encampments on properties are all valid. However, they must be addressed with compassion that prioritize both public safety and the dignity and well-being of unhoused individuals. The accountability of the city goes far beyond the three strikes law. The county needs to take responsibility of the low minimum wages, high rent costs, and overall cost of living that leads residents into homelessness. It is imperative that we find other ways that support homelessness populations that do not compromise their dignity and support the broken system that marginalized people go into the criminal justice system. Thank you. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Alicia, JP, and Natalya. I have had the privilege of working with them this year on the project of homelessness and ethics. So now we're going to shift to another fellowship at the Ethics Center, the Environmental Ethics Fellowship, which has been generously supported by Phil Johnson. And this team looked at another local issue, but has much broader implications, a big flood in March of 2023 in the farm worker town of Pajaro, California. So this team includes Mahi Shah. Mahi is a first-year student from Salinas, California, majoring in civil engineering. Arden DeCico. Arden is a senior from Amerenik, New York, who is a double major in environmental studies and economics. Jessica Garofalo, a senior environmental science major from Denver, Colorado. And Hannah Hamawi, a sophomore from Los Angeles, studying civil, environmental, and sustainable engineering. Over to you, environmental ethics team.
Hi, everyone. This year, our project has been exploring the Pajaro levee failure. Our research follows the levee breach and flood that happened in March in 2023. The levee failure happened on the Pajaro side of the Pajaro River, which is just south of Watsonville, about 45 minutes an hour away from here. This levee failure in the middle of the night led to a devastating flood, which caused over 1,500 residents in Pajaro alone to evacuate, along with massive amounts of damages. The notable implications of this are the obvious displacement of residents. Thousands of residents were displaced for anywhere from a week to multiple months. Not only were their homes damaged, but they also didn't have access to clean drinking water or potable water to shower with or clean with for multiple weeks after the flood. There was also extensive damages to local businesses, which caused an economic standstill in this area for multiple weeks, months, and is still even ongoing. Additionally, there was significant damage to agricultural lands. This is especially significant as the majority of the community members of Pajaro are farm workers that work in the agricultural lands surrounding Pajaro, which were heavily impacted by the floods. Additionally, there is a huge lack of infrastructure in the area due to the fact that it is an unincorporated community. They don't have the proper flood response. They don't have the infrastructure to prepare for a flood, respond to a flood. And there was overall just a lack of appropriate aid. We conducted many interviews with residents, local business owners, and the general trend was that there was not sufficient aid for the March 2023 flood or historic floods that have happened in previous decades. A lot of this is simply because it is an unincorporated community in the county of Monterey. They don't have a mayor, they don't have any form of government, they don't have a sheriff's office. The community is mainly made up of low-income, undocumented people of color who, as I mentioned, work in agriculture. And this community has been historically marginalized. So following that, that is kind of the background on what the work we've been doing.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. So I'll be speaking about the research strategy side of our fellowship and the methods we use to better understand what the Pajaro community was thinking, feeling, and experiencing during, before, and after the 2023 flood. So like Jessica said, we conducted focus groups with residents to gather firsthand accounts of the flood and recovery process. Residents shared powerful stories of fear, frustration, and resilience, many describing a lack of early warning, chaotic evacuations, and inaccessible aid systems. And for some context, FEMA aid is government assistance meant to help people after disasters, so covering things like temporary housing, repairs, and essential needs. But the application process is confusing and very difficult to navigate, especially for undocumented or low-income residents, and many were denied or gave up applying altogether. So one quote that I highlighted here that stayed with me reflects that sense of helplessness. A resident said, "We gathered everything they told us, absolutely everything. We handed that over to FEMA, but FEMA never helped us. They rejected the request. Why? We don't know." Even when they followed every step, they were still left behind. But alongside that frustration, residents were clear about what needs to change. Their calls for stronger flood protection, clearer communication, and faster, more inclusive aid systems really helped shape the ethical framing of our research. So in addition to the focus groups, we interviewed local leaders and experts in fields like insurance, infrastructure, policy, and engineering to better understand broader barriers to recovery. One powerful example came from a conversation we had with Alfonso Moraine and Lorena Weldon, who are the president and vice president of the Pajaro Business Group. They formed the group after the 2023 flood to advocate for residents and local small businesses. And so, as Jessica mentioned, Pajaro is unincorporated, which means it lacks formal political representation and is often excluded from key recovery decisions. But the group and their advocacy helped secure more equitable state funding. And actually, just recently, their group was approved for nonprofit status, which is a major milestone that shows how far the community has come and the impact that community organizing has. Something that they emphasized most was the lack of communication, again, before, during, and after the flood, which created a lot of fear, confusion, and a deep sense of being ignored. But their message was clear: disaster planning must center community voices from the start, and ethical recovery means rebuilding trust from the ground up and making sure that systems reflect the realities and the needs of those most at risk. And I would just like to say we're incredibly grateful to the Pajaro residents and everyone that we interviewed for sharing their time and stories with us. Their voices truly made this project possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Arden. So focusing on the engineering aspect of our research, we examined the National Levy Database, which is a website designed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that helps provide data on levees across the country. So using this database, we analyzed the historic loading of the Pajaro Left Bank levee, which helps us understand the stress that the levee has experienced from past flooding events, which directly affects the levee's current condition and performance. Due to climate change, there has been a significant increase in both the frequency and intensity of rainfall, which puts more strain on levees nationwide. In fact, by the year 2050, climate change is projected to increase U.S. flood risk by 26%, and global flood damages may rise by over 20% as well. Generally, levees are engineered to withstand what's called a 1 in 100 year flood, which is a severe flood event that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So this doesn't mean that such a flood would happen once every 100 years, but it rather reflects a statistical likelihood of it occurring. However, as extreme weather becomes more frequent, these rare events are happening far more often than previously expected. Despite many levies in the U.S., despite this, many levies in the U.S. do not meet this standard, largely due to the fact that these designs are very outdated and there is neglected maintenance as well. The Pajaro levee was built in 1949 and it exemplifies this issue. It has not undergone any major renovations since its construction, despite being breached in both 1995 and 2013. Today, it holds roughly a 1 in 8 year flood rating, which is very far from the 1 in 100 standard. Because Pajaro is an unincorporated city, the levee's maintenance has been overlooked, and it reflects a broader national infrastructure problem where aging levees are not equipped to handle the new climate changes that we face. So with climate change accelerating and repairs stalled for decades, the March 2023 breach of the Pajaro levee was not just predictable, but it was very long overdue.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So to further expand our engineering analysis of the Pajaro levee failure, we decided to look into the cost-benefit analysis for levees. And through looking into this cost-benefit analysis, we realized that one of the main reasons why the levee had not been fixed despite many breaches was the cost-benefit analysis used by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, also known as the USACE, is a federal agency responsible for maintaining flood infrastructure in the U.S. As they're a federal agency, the USACE has a lot of budget constraints from Congress, which impacts project funding. As they're unable to fund every single flood infrastructure project which needs repairs, they utilize a cost-benefit analysis which compares the cost of maintaining levees to the potential benefits of reduced flood damage and increased flood safety. This leads to prioritization of levee repairs for urban areas with critical structures, often focusing on cheaper, superficial repairs rather than costly, in-depth structural repairs. Similarly, due to lack of large infrastructure and a lower population in marginalized areas, marginalized communities are under-prioritized in the USACE cost-benefit analysis, as it is presumed that the cost of repairing the levee would not outweigh the damages that would be caused due to a flood failure. Due to Pajaro specifically being an unincorporated community, as mentioned earlier, with no form of town government, they must rely on the County Board of Supervisors to advocate for them, which is very large and has many priorities beyond just protecting Pajaro. Along with that, despite multiple attempts to introduce legislation, the cost-benefit analysis has remained the same since 1983 and does not consider climate change causing a higher frequency of the 1 in 100-year flood event that Hannah was mentioning, along with more varied types of flood incidences. Due to the limitations of the cost-benefit analysis and the USACE's inability to grant the complete amount of money required to fix the levee, many organizations in charge of levee repair are required to look to other sources to find more funding, which again makes it difficult for organizations in Pajaro to find the full funding needed to repair the left bank levee, which is a $100 million project. Thank you guys so much for visiting today. Please reach out if you have any further questions.
Thank you so much, Hannah, Mahi, Arden, and Jessica. I also have had the privilege of working with that great team this year. Those are some photographs of us down in Pajaro. And I also want to call out Rocio Segura, professor in our civil engineering faculty, Iris Stewart-Fry, professor in our environmental science and studies faculty, and Alan Baez-Morales and folks at the Center for Frugal Innovation. Rocio and Iris have been co-partners throughout the entire project, and Alan and members of his team have been incredibly supportive of our efforts in the Environmental Ethics Fellowship. All right, we are now going to shift our focus again and go to our terrific Government Ethics Fellows. I saw in the question and observation, the question box, we're going to need a lot more Government Ethics Fellows the next few years. I heartily endorse that, and I'm so glad we have some awesome ones this year. So our first Environmental Ethics Fellow is Ainsley Zapata. Ainsley is a junior majoring in political science and Spanish from Irvine, California, and all of our Government Ethics Fellows have worked with John Pelissaro, our Director of Government Ethics. Ainsley, over to you, please.
Hi. Okay, so this year my project was on the ethical implications of the rise of voting rights restrictions in the United States, specifically between 2021 and 2024. So between 2021 and 2024, the United States saw an unprecedented rise in the number of restrictive voting rights laws across the country. In this case, restrictive voting rights laws are any law that makes it more difficult for a person to vote. This includes removing polling places or ballot boxes, increased ID requirements to vote in person, restrictions on mail-in ballots, decreases in registration windows, and voter roll purges, etc. The focus of my study was to determine if the stated goals of a particular law or set of laws directly contrasted the predicted or practical outcomes of the law. For my research, I conducted a case study on the restrictive voting laws passed in Arizona, Georgia, Texas, and Florida between 2021 and 2024. I chose these years to study the impact of the stolen election rhetoric that was so commonly used following the result of the 2020 presidential election. The most common reasons given for many of these laws were in the name of security and election integrity, despite very few instances of these ever been found to have occurred. By using databases such as the Brennan Center and the National Conference of State Legislatures, I was able to conclude that these tangible effects often do not align with the stated goals of these laws. This begs the question, just who are these lawmakers trying to secure the system against? These laws disproportionately have practical or potential impacts on marginalized communities and their ability to vote. People of color are less likely to have the correct or acceptable form of ID, and they are more likely to have to drive further to reach the nearest polling place. Restrictions on mail-in voting make it more difficult for disabled folks to cast their vote as well. Furthermore, these types of laws signal a larger national trend, as demonstrated by new legislation presented in this congressional session. Congressman Chip Roy proposed the SAVE Act, which is another restrictive voting rights act, because he believes Democrats are taking drastic steps to fundamentally remake America through open borders, the release of millions of illegal aliens into our communities, and by waging a full-scale assault on election integrity laws. The ethical analysis of this issue through the rights lens is twofold. First, we can clearly see the restriction of a constitutionally guaranteed right all over the country, as this phenomenon is not just restricted to these 4 states. When this right is threatened, it brings into question the principle of one man, one vote, or whether or not certain votes count for more than others in elections. Second, people have the right to maintain their dignity when voting. If people want to vote in a particular way, be it in person or through a mail-in ballot, it should be the responsibility of the government to ensure that they are able to exercise this right with minimal barriers. These increasing restrictions are violating this right to choice as well as compromising the overall right to vote, and this sets a dangerous precedent for the future of elections in the United States. Thank you.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. All right, I'm so sorry. Ainsley, thank you so much. Terrific presentation. Our next presenter is Bailey Black. Bailey is a senior majoring in political science and economics from Kirkland, Washington. Bailey, over to you, please.
Thank you. So my research concerns the ethics of presidential immunity, with a specific focus on the Supreme Court's decision in Trump v. United States last year. This case stemmed from federal charges filed against Donald Trump for his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, as well as his role in the events of January 6th. And in the case, the court, in a 6-3 decision written by Chief Justice Roberts, ruled that presidents have absolute immunity for the exercise of core constitutional powers, and presumptive immunity for all other official acts they take. And importantly, they ruled that in order to overcome that presumption of immunity, a prosecutor would need to show that applying a criminal prohibition to the act would pose no dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. So in this case, the Supreme Court was tasked on ruling on the case itself, but also with writing a more general rule about how we should handle the potential criminal prosecution of U.S. presidents. And so my work has analyzed the court's decision as well as the issue of presidential immunity more generally through 3 ethical lenses I think are relevant. So the justice lens is the first one. And the basic idea here is just that individuals should be treated the same unless they differ in ways that are relevant to the situation in which they're involved. I think there's no question here, right, that in granting presidents broad immunity from legal accountability, they're certainly being treated differently. Obviously, the important question is whether that differential treatment is based on a relevant distinction. And I think there are some relevant distinctions here. There's a couple rationale that I think can justify some sort of greater requirement that needs to be met in order to justify prosecuting a president. And these are rationales the court has used in the past, mostly focused on the risk of criminal prosecution or prosecution at all, distracting a president from their uniquely important responsibilities, as well as potentially having a chilling effect on their ability to take necessary, if perhaps unpopular action. But at the same time, I think the extent to which this difference in responsibilities and the status of the president can justify disparate treatment isn't endless. And I would argue that the court goes a little too far in how broadly they allow this immunity to sweep. Another lens I think is helpful here is the common good lens, asks us to look at what options best serves the needs and common interests of the community as a whole. I would argue that national security and effective administration of the law, as well as a fair and effective criminal justice system, right? These are all important common goods. I think this chilling effect rationale I mentioned just a second ago, I think that applies here too. And there is some concern that making it too easy to prosecute a president could have a chilling effect on the president's ability to take actions that might be necessary to protect national security, and that could undermine the interests of the common good. But I also think that this needs to be balanced against this compelling public interest we have in fair and effective law enforcement. And I don't think the court did a great job of balancing those interests. It really swung much more in favor of protecting the ability of the president to be kind of bold and unhesitating in action, and spent a lot less time considering the importance of making sure that no one is above the law. And then lastly, just real quick, just the utilitarian lens, right? Here we're talking about what action will produce the greatest balance of good versus harm. And importantly here, right, we need to get a sense of the likelihood of a particular result and its impacts. And I think this is an area where, just because of how recent this case is, we don't really know or have a great sense of how to handle it from this perspective. How you feel about this decision is probably going to hinge a lot on what you think is the most likely outcome. If you end up with presidents who are kind of emboldened by this new immunity to act in a more criminal fashion, then maybe we're going to look back on this in 20 years and say this is clearly the wrong decision. But if we end up with greater polarization and like the law being used for political ends, presidents trying to prosecute their predecessors, maybe we'll look back a little more favorably on this case. But I would argue in general that the court really opened some risky doors in how it handled this case and how broadly it allowed immunity to sweep, looking at especially under these three ethical lenses. So thank you.
Bailey, thank you so much for an excellent analysis of truly a once-in-a-lifetime case that we heard. All right, we are now with our final speaker and another government ethics fellow, Christian Barnard. And Christian is a junior, double majoring in political science and theater from Denver, Colorado. And I'm sure he's going to bring us on home here with a terrific presentation. Christian, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. In my research, I was curious about the ethics of utilizing alternative electoral systems. So in 2024, Colorado considered implementing the alternative election method known as ranked choice voting on a statewide level, and I wanted to evaluate the ethics and the plausibility of such an implementation. The term ranked choice voting is used interchangeably with the term instant runoff, both of which describe the way in which votes are tabulated. And contrary to some misleading rhetoric, it does not give individuals multiple counted votes. In the most common plurality system, voters cast their ballot for one candidate only, with the majority deemed the winner. Sometimes this results in runoff elections, but instead of holding two separate elections, instant runoff settles this all in one. It does so by having voters rank their candidates in order of preference. First place votes are counted, and if there is no candidate who wins a majority, the least grossing candidate is eliminated, and every voter who has them as their first place ballot will have their second choice tallied. This process continues until a candidate wins a majority. And this system is intended to allow for voters to have more accurately expressed voting preference. Voters would no longer be disincentivized from voting for candidates that have less of a chance of winning a majority, coined the spoiler effect, and why third-party candidates are often seen as wasted votes. RCV does not remove the complexity of voting strategy altogether, but RCV's center squeeze phenomena typically results in more moderation rather than completely non-desired outcomes and occurs far less frequently. RCV's increase in quality of competitive elections is due to the proliferation of viable candidates. The electorate's options regarding policy nuance is drastically increased. It also has a direct correlation with positive and active campaigning. In RCV, in order to secure a majority, a candidate must appeal to a wide range of voters or run the risk of being outvoted by a similarly positioned candidate with broader appeal. Candidates are rewarded less for negative campaigning tactics aimed towards undermining competition, and the marginal returns of these tactics could promote a more constructive debate and opportunities for legislative compromise. The main concerns with using ranked choice voting are the increase in ballot error rates. It increases the amount of exhausted ballots that do not count towards any candidate at a roughly 0.5% higher rate. This error rate is also disproportionately affecting translated ballots and our already marginalized voting blocks. This value might be inflated as our pool of data is quite recent and hasn't adjusted for constituent familiarity across the board. The fiscal considerations for implementing ranked choice voting is also likely another large hurdle. Hundreds of thousands would be spent on operation costs, labor costs, the cost of licensing from private certified vendors, maintenance costs, and the cost of scale, as operation costs are only exacerbated by the size of the electorate. Now, it is important to note that some of the costs can be offset by the elimination of runoff elections too. While these are objective pros and cons for implementing ranked choice voting, support for RCV has become a heavily politicized issue. Much of Republican rhetoric paints RCV as a potential way for electioneering to take place, citing concerns for election integrity. And while this is unquantifiable in statistics as far as we are capable of understanding, there is plausible room for more human error or even electioneering, even though organized electioneering is incredibly unlikely and difficult. Still, we see legislation banning the implementation of RCV in a variety of red states. When applying this criteria to Colorado, cost was seemingly one of the main deterrents. The switch was costly for any town or city or county, but statewide is an incredibly high hurdle. The bill was designed by a former CEO of healthcare, which resulted in the perception of being a little out of touch with the electorate. Critics say that the proposition was, quote, overly complicated and overly expensive with zero input from election clerks, to use the words of Colorado Democratic Party Chair Shad Murib. Although it is impossible to discern the reason every individual voted the way they did, resulting in a 45 for yes and a 55 for no split, the general consensus is that voter confusion concerns and the fiscal cost concerns were the major deterrents, fueled by politicized rhetoric. Through the virtue lens, we are incentivizing virtuous campaign actions that are more conducive to productive democracy. And through the rights lens, RCV would strengthen the power of an individual's right to vote, as it would be more likely that their vote counts towards more accurate and meaningful competitive elections. And although these boons are appealing to voters, the obstacles in the way seemed insurmountable in not only Colorado, but in Arizona, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, and Oregon too. Thank you very much.
Christian, thank you so much. You delivered, you brought us on home with a terrific accounting of a very vital, sort of imaginative way of approaching voting. Well, everyone, that concludes our wonderful Zoom showcase of our terrific students. I'd like to sort of give a collective shout out to all of them. And I know they've each spent so much time going over their presentations, working so hard throughout the year, and kind of condensing them to the terrific presentations we've heard tonight. So applause to them and all of them. Much of their work, all of their work, will be available, as a number of students mentioned, and posted on the Ethics Center website. We'll be able to see it there over the course of the summer. That material will get posted. I'd also like to just say thank you to a number of people, to our donors again, Mike and Joan Hackworth and the Hackworth family, to Phil Johnson. I forgot to mention, I'm so sorry, the Malone Family Endowment for Ethics Education, which has supported our Business Ethics Internship, and to all the donors who make possible what we do. giving opportunities to these terrific students and enabling us to work with them. And then at the Ethics Center, I would like to thank Johanna Engstrom, our colleague who was just so instrumental in pulling together this entire evening, Joel Dibble, Debbie Dembecki, Monica DeLong, and my apologies for anyone I may be forgetting to thank. Thank you all so much for tuning in and listening. It means so much to us to be part of a larger community, all of us concerned about just trying to do the right thing, especially in this challenging space world that we are all living in right now. So thank you all so much and good night.